The call connected on the fourth ring. Eliot could hear music in the background, glasses clinking, laughter, the warm, insulated sound of a room full of people who were not standing in 9°, whether watching an old woman's hands turn blue. Victoria. His voice was already cracking from the cold. I need you to come. A pause. Then her voice, smooth, unhurried. The voice she used when she wanted someone to feel small, without being able to prove it. Eliot, we talked about this. My mother can't feel her left hand. The roads are iced over. There are no cars available, and I have Senator Drummond here. Something in his chest went very still. Victoria, and half of Austin. This endorsement is worth $3 million to the campaign. I am not leaving. She is 67 years old with a broken hip. Then you should have handled the car situation when I told you 2 weeks ago. The line went dead. Eliot stood outside that gas station on the edge of Garland for a long moment. Phone in hand, wind screaming across the flatlands, the temperature dropping further by the minute, and something shifted in him. Not dramatically, not loudly, the way a foundation cracks. Silently, deep below the surface, in a place nobody can see. He didn't know yet that Victoria had been sleeping with Senator Drummond for 14 months. He didn't know yet that the house they shared, the one in his name, purchased with money his mother had given them, was about to be transferred to Victoria's LLC through paperwork already sitting on a lawyer's desk. He didn't know yet that by the time his mother's hands had feeling them again, his reputation, his finances, and every mutual friend he'd ever had would be systematically, surgically destroyed. What he knew was this. His mother was cold, and the woman he had loved for 11 years had just hung up the phone. Let me ask you something before we go 1 second further. Have you ever been at your absolute lowest? I mean, floor of the ocean low, and the one person who was supposed to show up just didn't? Not because they couldn't. Because you weren't worth the inconvenience? Stay with me, because Victoria Hartwell is about to show you that there is no bottom to how low some people can go. And Eliot Hartwell is about to show you what a man builds when the world thinks he's been buried. Here is what you need to know before the story ends. The land Victoria's most valuable infrastructure contract sits on, the contract that made her a millionaire and launched her political career. That land has a history she never investigated. She should have investigated it, because the man she left in the snow that night, his family's name is in the title documents. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the blizzard. Dorothea Hartwell, to every person who had ever earned her trust, was sitting on a plastic chair inside a gas station on the edge of Garland. Her walker folded beside her, her coat buttoned to the very top button, watching her son through the glass door. She had watched him make 4 calls. She had watched his posture change on the last one. She knew, from the way his shoulders dropped exactly 1 inch and then reset, the same way Cornelius's shoulders used to do when he had decided to stop fighting something and start planning instead. What the answer had been. I had known about Victoria for longer than Eliot would have been comfortable knowing. She had known the night Victoria came home from a fundraiser with Senator Drummond's aftershave on the collar of her blazer and explained it away with a story about a handshake and a crowded room. She had watched Victoria's eyes during that explanation, steady, practiced, not a single flicker, and thought, that woman has told this particular lie before. She had said nothing to Eliot, because her son loved Victoria the way good men love complicated women, completely, inconveniently, without adequate self-preservation, and had decided that the love was worth more than the warning, that he would have to see it himself. She was starting to wonder if she had waited too long. Eliot came back inside, crouched in front of her, took both her hands in his and started rubbing them. I'm going to figure this out, Mama. I know you are, baby. She's not coming. I know that too. He looked up at her. There was something in his face she recognized, the same look Cornelius used to get just before he went very quiet for a very long time and came out the other side with a plan nobody had seen coming. What do we do? He said, not helplessly, like a man doing triage. We survive tonight, that said, and then we figure out the rest in the morning. She didn't tell him, in that gas station, that there was a box, that Cornelius had left something, that the quiet man in the used Buick had been building something for 30 years specifically because he had always suspected that the people around his son would one day require a reckoning. That was a conversation for later. First, they had to get warm. What happened over the next 6 hours was a story Eliot would tell at the foundation, opening years later. Not the version that made him look heroic. The version that was just true. He found an emergency blanket in a rack near the back of the gas station. He bought every hand warmer they had. He got his mother hot water in a styrofoam cup and wrapped her hands around it. He kept her talking, told her the story about the 12-year-old boy in the neighbor's buried car until she was laughing hard enough that her cheeks had color again. At 2 a.m, a truck slowed outside. The driver's name was Burl Mackey, a retired plumber from Forney, on his way back from his sister's place, who had absolutely no reason to stop, but whose mother had raised him in a specific way that made driving past a man and an elderly woman at a gas station in a blizzard thing he was constitutionally incapable of doing. Burl drove them to Dot's apartment, cranked the heat to 80, refused the $40. "Man, that's your mama," Burl said, like it was obvious, like it was the only thing that needed saying. Eliot sat on the floor of his mother's apartment at 3 a.m, back against the radiator, and let himself feel the full weight of the night. Dot's hand on top of his head, the radiator's warmth, and the knowledge, sitting quiet and cold in his chest, that the woman he'd driven home to every night for 11 years had chosen a dinner party. The press conference came 48 hours after the blizzard. Navy blazer, pearl earrings, hair swept back, the podium, the cameras, the practice pause before the difficult admission. She talked about sacrifice. She talked about a marriage where she had given everything while her partner had. And here the pause, the eyes dropping, the almost emotion, stopped growing beside me a long time ago. She never said abandonment. She was too intelligent for a word that could be disproved. She just described a woman who had been carrying something alone, who had chosen her own growth, who wished him nothing but peace. The internet needed approximately 45 minutes to construct the rest of the narrative. By the following morning, Victoria Hartwell's husband couldn't handle her success. By that afternoon, sad but not surprising, some men can't grow. By the end of the week, a lifestyle podcast with 6 million subscribers had released an episode titled, "When Is the Weight You Have to Drop," that featured, in its third segment, a voice actress dramatically reading lines that were not attributed to Victoria, but clearly sourced from somewhere, describing a husband who had become a ghost in my own home. Eliot's phone rang twice that first week. His cousin Reginald, checking on him, and Preston, Victoria's brother, called to let him know that the divorce papers were being sent and that keeping things clean was in everyone's interest. 3 words. Till here, okay. He didn't know yet about the house. The house was in Eliot's name. It had been purchased with a combination of his salary and $60,000 that had given him as a wedding gift. Money that had been saving since Eliot was in high school, money set aside from Cornelius's careful, invisible work, given freely because she believed in the marriage. Victoria's attorney filed a motion arguing that the house represented a marital asset tied to joint enterprise, specifically that Victoria's career earnings had funded the mortgage payments for 4 of the 11 years. This was technically accurate and comprehensively dishonest. What the filing did not mention was the $60,000 down payment, or the fact that Eliot had covered the mortgage alone during the 3 years Victoria's campaign had operated at a loss, or the fact that the career earnings cited included compensation from 2 contracts that Eliot had helped her secure through introductions to his professional network. The judge, overwhelmed, overworked, presented with paperwork from one of the sharpest real estate attorneys in Dallas, approved the transfer. Eliot came home from work one Thursday to find the locks changed. A note on the door from Victoria's attorney informed him that he had 72 hours to retrieve personal belongings by appointment. He stood on his own front porch for a moment. Then he went to his truck, drove to a hardware store, bought a notebook and a pen, drove to a diner on Garland Road, and ordered coffee. He sat there for 2 hours. He wrote down everything. Not a plan. Not yet. Just everything. The house, the accounts, the night of the blizzard, the press conference, the podcast, the locks. Every brick in the wall she was building around him. He wrote it all down because his father had once told him, the first step to fixing a problem is refusing to pretend the problem is smaller than it is. He drove to Reginald's house that night. He slept on Reginald's couch for 3 weeks. The joint checking account, 11 years of shared finances, $34,000 in savings, was frozen the morning after the lock change. Victoria's attorney cited a pending financial disclosure review as justification. The freeze was temporary, legally, but temporary in legal terms meant for the 6 months, which in practical terms meant the $34,000 was inaccessible while Eliot was sleeping on a couch and looking for somewhere to live. He had $1,200 in a personal account he'd opened separately 3 years earlier. A habit, not a conspiracy. Just a man who liked knowing there was something that was only his. That $1,200 became his operating capital. He found an apartment in East Dallas, a studio, 2nd floor, radiator that sounded like a man trying to start a lawnmower in the cold. $780 a month. He went to work. The social surgery was the one that took the longest to understand. Eliot and Victoria had 11 years of shared friends, couples they'd known since before marriage, colleagues who had become genuine human beings, neighbors, people from every layer of a life built together. Within 60 days of the press conference, Eliot had heard from exactly 4 of them. Reginald, Burrell, whom he'd found through the cousin network and called to say thank you. His colleague at the property firm, a quiet man named Aldous, who said, "I don't know what happened between you two, and I'm not going to ask," and immediately invited him to a barbecue. And that, who called every day. Everyone else had, in the polite language of social disappearance, simply stopped calling. He found out later, months later, from a woman named Celeste who had been in their wedding and who had enough decency to eventually be honest, that Victoria had been systematically working the room, not loudly, not dramatically, just having coffees, attending dinners, mentioning, with that particular brand of careful sadness she was so gifted at performing, that Eliot had really struggled during the marriage, that she tried to get him help, that she worried about him, that she hoped he was doing okay. She planted seeds of concern so precisely that by the time people encountered Eliot, quiet, unchanged, not asking for sympathy, they interpreted his calm as confirmation of her story. Yes, he does seem to be struggling. She said he wouldn't show it. It was masterful and it was vicious, and it cost him nothing, because it was done with smiles over coffee. The worst of it was Eliot's own cousin, Darnella, not Reginald, but his older cousin on his father's side, a woman Eliot had grown up calling Della. Victoria had attended Della's daughter's baby shower 3 months before the divorce. She had brought an expensive gift. She had been warm and present and charming. After the press conference, Della called Eliot. "I love you," Della said, "but I've known Victoria for years. And baby," some of what she's saying, "I can't just dismiss it." Eliot held the phone. "What is she saying, Della?" A pause. That you had a drinking problem. That she covered for you for years. He had never once in his adult life had a drinking problem. "Della, I'm not saying I believe everything. I'm just saying I can't take sides." He set the phone down, quietly, without anger, because anger would have been easier, and this was not anger. This was a specific, cold grief of being rewritten by someone who knew you completely and used that knowledge to construct a fiction, so precisely aimed that it could not be fully disproved. He sat at his kitchen table. He opened the notebook. He wrote it down. Eliot's position at the property assessment firm was not glamorous, but it was stable. It was honest work. And his supervisor, a precise, methodical man named Grant Elwood, had told him on 2 separate occasions that he was the most thorough assessor on the team. He got the call on a Tuesday afternoon. Grant's voice was different. Careful. "Eliot, I need to talk to you about some concerns that have been raised." "What concerns?" A pause. "We've received a complaint. I can't tell you the source, alleging that you falsified assessment reports on 3 properties in the Lakewood area earlier this year." Eliot's hand tightened on the phone. "Grant, that's not true." "I know. I pulled your reports myself. They're clean, but the complaint went to the licensing board, not just to us. And the licensing board has opened a review." Another pause. "I won't keep you on. I believe you. But legal is telling me I have to put you on administrative leave while the review is active." The review took 4 months. He was cleared completely. Every report verified. The complaint revealed to be unsubstantiated and filed anonymously through a third-party legal service that could not be easily traced. But 4 months without income. For months, he drove deliveries. He did landscaping work for a company in Mesquite. He moved furniture for a man in Richardson who paid cash. He ate simply and spent nothing he didn't have to. He slept in his truck for 11 days during the 3rd month when the rent came due before a check had cleared, because he refused to ask Reginald for more, and he refused to let her know how bad it had gotten. And pride is a complicated thing when it's the last solid thing you own. 11 days in his truck. Winter again by then, mercifully mild. He would lie in the truck bed at night, looking at the Dallas skyline in the middle distance, and he would think about his father, about a man who had spent 30 years buying unremarkable land because he understood something that the loud and the ambitious never do. That patience, applied correctly, is not waiting. It is building, slowly, quietly, below the surface. He thought about the box that had mentioned. He thought about the word she'd used. Trust nobody. He thought about Victoria in her townhouse in Highland Park, with her driver and her campaign, and her image and her rising polls. She feels untouchable right now, he thought. Good. Let her feel it. The 3rd Tuesday after the licensing board cleared him and he was back at work, Eliot sat across from his mother at her kitchen table and told her everything, not to burden her, because she'd asked, because she was the Hartwell and she had been watching this story with 67 years of accumulated human intelligence, and she deserved to know. He told her about the house, the accounts, the friends, Della, the licensing complaint, the 11 days in the truck, that listened without interrupting. When he was finished, the apartment was very quiet except for the sound of television in the next room, muted, a game show nobody was watching. Baby, Dot said, some people love ladders more than they love people. Your father knew that. He spent his whole life watching ladder climbers use good people as rungs. She folded her hands on the table. Victoria saw you the way a climber sees a rung. Something to step on and leave behind. I know that now, Mama. Do you know what your father did when he saw ladder climbers? Eliot looked at her. He went underground. She said, he got quiet. He built where nobody could see. She tilted her head. Sound familiar? The box, he said. She nodded. Not yet, she said. But soon. There's something you need to know about that box first. Something about what your father was watching when he built what he built. She paused. He wasn't just watching the land, Eliot. He was watching the contracts, the infrastructure projects, the county development plans. Another pause, longer this time. He was watching who was connected to what. Eliot went still. What did he find? He said carefully. Dot looked at him with those eyes. 70 years of accumulated knowledge, sitting behind them like water behind a dam. You know the Meridian Bridge project? The contract that launched Victoria's company. He nodded slowly. The main parcel of land that project runs through, the primary corridor, the land they broke ground on with all those cameras and all that fanfare. Dot's voice was even, almost gentle. Your father owned that land, Eliot. He sold it to the county in 2003 through one of his LLCs. The same LLCs that are still active. The same ones that are in the box. The room held its breath. The contract that made Victoria Hartwell, Dot said quietly, was built on land your father once owned. Eliot sat back in his chair. He thought about Victoria at that podium. The ribbon cutting. The cameras. The headline. Crestline Group breaks ground on landmark infrastructure deal. He thought about a retired engineer in a used Buick, reading geological surveys and county development plans with the patience of a man who understood that the best view comes to those who wait for the right elevation. The man she mocked, Eliot thought, helped build the ground beneath her feet. There's one more thing, said. He looked at her. Your father left a letter, she said, in the box. He wrote it when you were still young, when he first started watching Victoria, before you two were even married. He was watching her that early? Your father read people the way he read land, said. He saw what was under the surface. She touched Eliot's hand. He wrote in that letter, if she is who I think she is, Eliot will need this inheritance not just for money. He'll need it because people like her only understand one language, and it isn't love. The apartment was completely silent. Eliot looked at his mother's face, lined and steady and full of the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, that just shows up at 3 a.m. with its hand on your head. "When do I get the box?" he said. "When it arrives," she said. "I've already sent it." She looked at the muted game show. "It'll be at your apartment Thursday." He drove home that night and sat in his truck outside his building for a long time, thinking about his father, thinking about a man who had seen this coming, who had quietly, carefully, invisibly built the answer to a problem his son didn't yet know he was going to have, thinking about Victoria, right now, in Highland Park, sleeping soundly, completely certain of her own invincibility. He picked up his notebook. He opened to a clean page. He began to write. It was sitting outside his door when he got home from an early shift. No fanfare, no dramatic presentation. Just a cardboard box sealed with brown tape, a lawyer's embossed seal on the outside, and a return address in Victoria. The city in South Texas, not the woman, sitting on the doormat of a second-floor apartment in East Dallas like it had always been there, waiting for him to be ready. Eliot picked it up. He set it on his kitchen table. He made coffee. He drank the entire cup standing at the counter, looking at the box, before he sat down and opened it. Inside, a handwritten letter from Cornelius Hartwell, dated 21 years ago. 3 sets of legal documents, each bound separately. A sealed envelope marked in his father's handwriting. For Eliot, when the noise stops and the thinking starts. A photograph, flat, scrubby South Texas terrain under a wide sky, with Lavaca County written on the back in blue pen. And a second photograph. This one stopped him cold. It was a county development map, dated in 1998, and overlaid on it, in red marker, in his father's hand, was a series of parcels, each one numbered, each number corresponding to a list on the back of photograph. One parcel was circled twice. On the back, next to its number, his father had written 4 words. Watch this one. Son. Eliot turned the photograph over. He looked at the circled parcel. He looked at it for a long time. Then he opened the legal documents. Then he opened his laptop. Then he pulled up the public records for the Meridian Bridge Infrastructure Corridor. He cross-referenced the parcel numbers. He sat back in his chair. The primary land corridor for Victoria's Meridian Bridge project. The contract that had launched Crestline Group, that had made her a millionaire, that she had stood in front of cameras cutting a ribbon on while Eliot was driving deliveries in a second-hand truck, ran directly through Parcel 7C of the Lavaca County Development Grid. Parcel 7C. His father had sold it to the county in 2003 through an LLC, the same LLC that was still active, still listed in the documents in front of him, still legally, technically, in a way that would require a forensic accountant to fully unpack, but that Weston Okafor would later describe as remarkably clean, tied to the Hartwell Family Trust. The county had used it, contracted it out, built on it, and Victoria had won the contract to build on it, without ever once investigating whose hands the land had passed through. She had built her empire on a foundation she didn't understand, and the man who laid that foundation had been watching her from the beginning. Eliot opened the letter. Eliot, if you're reading this, then life has gotten hard in a specific way. The kind of hard that comes from trusting the wrong person completely. I'm sorry for that. No father wants to be right about the people his children love. I started watching Victoria Hartwell the year you brought her home for Thanksgiving. Not because I disliked her. She was impressive, and I understand why you loved her. But I've spent my career reading the ground beneath structures. You learn, after enough years, that the most dangerous foundations are the ones that look the most solid from the surface. She looked at you the way certain people look at useful things. I started building what is in this box the year after your wedding, not out of malice, out of the understanding that a man should never be without ground to stand on, and that the people who love ladders more than people will always, eventually, kick the ladder out. The land in Lavaca County is worth considerably more than it was when I purchased it. The LLCs are clean and current. The trust documents are in order. Weston Okafor in Austin is the attorney. He is expecting your call. He has been expecting it for 11 years. I don't know exactly what she will do, but I know the type. And I know this. When you are ready, Not angry, not reactive, but truly ready. The ground beneath her success has your family's name in its history. Use that carefully. Use it cleanly. And use it for something that lasts longer than revenge. I love you more than I ever knew how to say out loud. Your father. Eliot read the letter 4 times. The 4th time he was not crying. He had passed through crying somewhere in the middle of the second read and come out the other side into something quieter and harder and more purposeful. His father had seen this coming. 21 years ago, at a Thanksgiving dinner table, Cornelius Hartwell had looked at the woman his son brought home and read the ground beneath her and started building the answer. Quietly, in a used Buick, with nobody watching. Eliot closed the letter carefully, set it on the table, picked up his phone, and called Weston Okafor in Austin. The phone rang once. "I've been expecting your call," Weston said. "I know," Eliot said. "Tell me everything." What she found, layer by layer, was this. Victoria's company looked like a tower from the outside, glass and steel and upward momentum, and her face on magazine covers. From the inside, it was a tower built on borrowed air. The Meridian Bridge project had run 31% over budget, a fact suppressed through a combination of creative accounting and strategic timing of public disclosures. Victoria had covered the gap by taking on private debt at rates that made Philomena wince audibly when she reviewed the term sheets. 3 subsequent infrastructure contracts, one on the strength of the Meridian reputation, had similarly aggressive financing structures, each one manageable in isolation. Together, they created a leverage ratio that would, under any serious scrutiny, look like what it was, a company running significantly faster than its foundations could support. She built the same way she lives, Philomena told Eliot, without a trace of editorial judgment. Fast, impressively, without ever looking down. The debt was held across 4 institutional investors. Over the next 14 months, carefully, through the holding companies, through secondary market purchases timed to avoid triggering disclosure thresholds, Eliot bought it. Not all at once, never dramatically, one piece at a time, the way his father had bought land. By the time Victoria Hartwell stood at a podium in downtown Dallas and announced her candidacy for governor of Texas, Eliot Hartwell was the single largest creditor of her company. She had no idea. Why would she? He drove a truck with a cracked dashboard. The announcement came on a Tuesday. Of course it did. I had the television on when Eliot arrived, and there Victoria was Navy blazer. Because she always came back to the Navy blazer. It was her armor and her flag. Standing at a podium with the Dallas skyline behind her and 200 supporters arranged in front of her in the careful geometry of a campaign that had been choreographed to within an inch of its life. "Today, I am announcing my candidacy for governor of the state of Texas." The room exploded. Eliot watched from his mother's couch, a plate of food in his hand, his expression unreadable. On the screen, Victoria was radiant, certain. The polls had her leading the primary field by 14 points. 3 major donors had already committed. Senator Drummond, standing in the second row, applauding, had publicly endorsed her campaign the previous week. Senator Drummond. Eliot had confirmed it 6 months earlier, through a source Weston had developed. A former aide who had left the senator's office under circumstances that left him willing to talk. 14 months. Victoria and Senator Drummond. The affair had started before the blizzard, before the divorce, before the press conference. The night she had hung up the phone. "I have Senator Drummond here." She had not been protecting a political endorsement. She had been protecting a man she was sleeping with. Eliot set his plate down. He looked at the television. He felt something he didn't have a clean word for. Not anger, because anger had burned out a long time ago. Something more like clarity. The final piece of a picture clicking into place. And the picture being exactly as ugly as it suspected. And the ugliness somehow making the next step easier. That muted the television. She looked at her son. "Is it time?" she said. He nodded. "Past time," he said. She reached over and put her hand on his. "Your father will be proud of you," she said. "Not for what you're about to do, for how you're about to do it." He looked at her. "Clean," she said. He always said, "Whatever you build it clean enough that you can stand next to it forever." "I know, Mama." "And Eliot," she held his eyes. "Don't do it for me. Don't do it for yourself. She glanced at the muted screen, where Victoria was still speaking, still radiant, still certain. Do it for every person she's going to step on next on her way up, if nobody stops her. He drove home that night and called Weston. "It's time," he said. Weston's response was immediate. "No surprise. No drama. I'll call Philomena. We'll be ready by Monday." The 2 weeks before the board meeting were the worst in a specific way, because Victoria was winning. Her campaign launch had generated $3 million in small donor contributions in 72 hours, a number that got its own news cycle. A poll released that Friday showed her at 41% in the primary, 19 points ahead of her nearest competitor. A national political magazine put her on its digital cover with the headline, "Is Texas ready for her?" Senator Drummond appeared at 2 campaign events. He was warm and credible, and his endorsement carried real weight with the donor class. The two of them stood side by side at a fundraiser in Highland Park, his hand briefly on the small of her back, a gesture so practiced it was almost invisible, and nobody in the room thought anything of it. She gave an interview that Friday evening. The journalist asked her if she had any regrets about the sacrifices she'd made to reach this point. Victoria was quiet for a moment, the practiced quiet of someone who prepared for this question. "I think," she said, "that the sacrifices that matter most are the ones you make before anyone is watching. The years of working when nobody cared. The decisions you make in private that shape everything that comes after." She looked directly at the camera. "I don't regret the hard seasons. They made me who I am." Eliot saw the clip on his phone. He watched it twice. He set the phone face down on the kitchen table. He went to bed. He slept 8 hours, the best sleep he'd had in 2 years. The emergency meeting of the Crestline Group Board was called for a Wednesday morning in March. The official reason, communicated to the company's general counsel, was a routine review of the Q4 debt obligations triggered by a filing threshold in the primary noteholder agreements. Victoria was not concerned. She had been briefed by her CFO, Randall, a compact, precise man who had served her loyally for 6 years, that the review was procedural and that the restructuring proposals her team had prepared would satisfy the noteholders. She arrived at the Crestline Tower in uptown Dallas at 8:47 a.m. She rode the elevator to the 31st floor. She walked into the glass-wall conference room. City views, morning light, the Dallas skyline spread out beneath them like a kingdom, and she took her seat at the head of the table. Around her, Douglas Fennell, the board chairman, who was looking at the table. Randall, the CFO, who was looking at his phone. Petra, her general counsel, who was looking at Douglas. 4 independent board members, 2 of whom were looking at each other with an expression Victoria could not read. And 3 people she did not recognize. Suits, neutral expressions, the particular stillness of people who have been in many rooms like this one and have never been the most nervous person in any of them. "Who are these people?" Victoria said. Douglas looked up. "Representatives of the primary noteholder," he said. "Which one?" Douglas cleared his throat. "The majority position. As of..." He checked a document in front of him. "Last Friday, the majority position?" Victoria frowned. "I wasn't informed of a change in the majority position. The change occurred through a series of secondary market conversions." One of the 3 strangers said. A woman, mid-40s, reading glasses, a voice like a closed door. Each individual transaction fell below the disclosure threshold. Collectively, they represent a controlling interest. "Controlling interest," Petra said carefully. 53.4% of the outstanding debt, the woman said, which, under Section 11.2 of the original debt agreements, your firm's drafting counselor converts to a 47% equity stake upon the filing of a conversion notice. A pause, which was filed Monday. The room went very still. Victoria looked at Douglas. Douglas looked at his document. "Doug," Victoria said. Her voice was still controlled. "Barely. What is happening?" "There's been a change of ownership," Douglas said quietly. "I was notified Sunday evening." "By whom?" A pause. "By the new majority shareholder," Douglas said. Victoria's general counsel Petra was already pulling documents, already scanning, already doing the fast, precise math of a lawyer who understood what Section 11.2 meant and was counting votes and finding numbers that did not add up the way they were supposed to. "This is not possible," Petra said. Not loudly, almost to herself. "And where," Victoria said, her voice dropping to register it reached when she was working very hard to remain composed, "is this majority shareholder? Why aren't they?" Douglas looked at the door. "They requested to be present for this meeting," he said. The door opened. Eliot Hartwell walked in. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit. Nothing flashy, nothing that announced itself. Exactly the kind of suit his father would have chosen. Polished shoes, a plain white shirt, no tie. He walked to the far end of the conference table. He pulled out the chair. He sat, and then he looked at Victoria. She had gone completely white. Not pale, white, the color of paper. The color of a woman whose nervous system had just received information that it did not have a framework to process. Her mouth opened. Nothing. Eliot let the silence sit for a full 10 seconds. Then, "Good morning." Quietly, evenly, the way you say good morning to someone in a hallway. "Eliot." Her voice was barely a voice. "Mr. Hartwell," the woman with the reading glasses said, turning to him. "The board is ready to proceed when you are." He nodded. He opened a folder in front of him. He looked at Douglas. "Let's start with the Meridian Project," he said. What happened in that room over the next 90 minutes was, by every account of people who were present, the most precisely executed corporate dismantling any of them had ever witnessed. Not angry, not theatrical, methodical. Eliot and Philomena, who entered the room 15 minutes in, walked the board to the actual financial architecture of Crestline Group, the real leverage ratios, the suppressed budget overruns, the debt structure that had been papered over with press releases and momentum, and Victoria's extraordinary gift for performing certainty in front of cameras. Randall, the CFO, had gone gray. He had known some of it, not all of it, and watching it laid out with Philomena's forensic precision, he understood for the first time the full shape of what he'd been participating in. He cleared his throat. He looked at Douglas. "I need to amend my Q4 presentation," he said. Victoria turned to look at him. He did not meet her eyes. "Randall," she said. "I'm sorry, Victoria." He said it quietly. He said it like a man setting down something he'd been carrying too long. The numbers are the numbers. The two independent board members, men who had been on the Crestline board for optics and a quarterly fee and who had spent most of their tenure nodding during presentations, were leaning forward now, looking at the documents in front of them with the sudden attentiveness of people who had just realized the building therein has a structural problem. One of them looked at Eliot. "Is the restructuring plan in the packet?" he asked. "Pages 40 through 63, Eliot said. "The Meridian contracts continue. Employee positions are protected. The debt converts to equity under the terms I've outlined." The board member nodded slowly. Victoria stood up. "This is my company," she said. Her voice was back, controlled, present, the voice from the podium. "I built this. From nothing. The restructuring plan is before the board." Douglas said gently, but with the finality of a man who has made a decision he is not reversing. "The vote will proceed." Douglas. Victoria. He looked at her. 63 years old. White-haired. The kind of steady that comes from having seen too much to be easily shaken. "Please sit down." She sat. The vote was 5-1. The one was Victoria. The board meeting was not immediately public. But Dallas was a city where the right people knew everything within 48 hours, and Alondra Reyes, the political journalist who had been building her Crestline story for 7 months, published her piece at Friday with 3 news sources, and a 4th who had clearly been in that conference room. The headline, Crestline Group's Debt Crisis, what Victoria Hartwell's campaign didn't disclose. It was careful, sourced, devastating. By Monday, 2 campaign donors had called to pause their commitments. By Wednesday, Senator Drummond, who had by then received a call from Weston Okafor's office containing information about a certain 14-month relationship and its potential intersection with campaign finance disclosures, released a statement announcing he was reevaluating his endorsement in light of emerging questions. The statement was a masterpiece of political cowardice. It destroyed her anyway. By the following Monday, Victoria's poll numbers had dropped 11 points. The donors who paused became donors who departed. The campaign office, which had been loud and crowded and full of the specific energy of people who believe they are on the winning side of history, got quieter each morning. A second journalist, building on Alondra's work, published a piece about the anonymous licensing complaint filed against a property assessor in Dallas 3 years earlier. A complaint that had been traced, through careful document work, to a legal services firm with historical ties to crestline groups outside council. The piece did not say Victoria ordered it. It did not need to. She drove herself. No driver. No comms person. No aid. No armor of any kind except the clothes on her back. And whatever was left of the composure she had spent 11 years constructing. She sat in her car outside his building for 14 minutes. Eliot saw the car from his window. He recognized it. He stood at the window and looked at it for a moment, then went to his kitchen and put the kettle on and was pouring water when the knock came. He opened the door. She looked. And this was the thing nobody who knew Victoria Hartwell would have believed if they hadn't seen it. Small. Not physically, but in the way a person looks when the performance has finally come down, and what's underneath is just a human being who is very tired and very frightened and running out of moves. "Can I come in?" she said. He stepped back. She walked in, stood in the middle of his small, clean apartment, looked around at the plain furniture, the radiator, the index car on the wall in its black frame. She read it. "You don't announce what you're building until it's already built." Her jaw tightened. Then she looked at him. "Your father wrote that," she said. "He lived it," Eliot said. She pressed her lips together. Something moved across her face. Not one thing, a sequence of things, too fast to name individually. Then she said, "I know what you did. All of it. West and Okafor, the holding companies, Philomena Greer, the debt conversions." She exhaled. "My lawyers have been working around the clock." "I know," he said. "It was extraordinary," she said. And she meant it. He could tell she meant it, because Victoria Hartwell, whatever else she was, had always recognized craftsmanship. "Your father built the foundation, and you built the house. He taught me how." A silence. "The employees," she said. 430 people. Most of them had nothing to do with any of my decisions. And the Meridian communities. There are towns in West Texas that have been waiting 15 years for that infrastructure. "I know," he said. "The restructuring plan is already filed. The contract continue. The employees are protected." He poured 2 cups of tea. She hadn't asked for one, but he handed it to her anyway, the muscle memory of 11 years of marriage. And she took it without comment. Crestline survives, just under different management. She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Then what was it for?" she said, not aggressive, genuinely asking. The question of a woman who needs to understand something before she can carry it. If not to destroy it, then why? He looked at her for a long moment. "You want to know why?" "Yes." He sat down at the kitchen table. She remained standing. "The night of the blizzard," he said, "I called you 4 times. The 4th time you answered, you told me you were with Senator Drummond." He said the name evenly, without emphasis, letting her understand that he knew exactly what that meant. "You weren't protecting an endorsement. You were protecting an affair. And while you were doing that, my 67-year-old mother with a broken hip was sitting in a gas station in 9-degree weather going hypothermic." Victoria said nothing. "I survived that night," he said. "My mother survived it. And then I watched you stand at a podium and perform the story of a woman who had sacrificed everything while she was sleeping with a senator and had already called a lawyer about our house." He paused. "But even all of that wasn't the thing that made me decide." "Then what was—" "Della," he said. Victoria blinked. "My cousin Della, who I grew up with, who called me to tell me that I had a drinking problem. Because you sat at her daughter's baby shower and smiled and planted that seed in her head, and you knew, Victoria, you knew, that I had never once in my life had a drinking problem. You used specific, targeted, surgical knowledge of the people who love me to make them doubt me." His voice remained quiet throughout, not angry, steady. "That was when I understood that you were not just someone who had chosen ambition over our marriage. You were someone who was willing to destroy the people around me as cover for your own retreat. The apartment was very quiet. So no, he said, it wasn't about punishing you. It was about making sure you couldn't keep climbing on people who didn't know they were being used as rungs. He looked at his tea. The company will do more good under restructured management than it was doing under yours. The employees are safer. The communities get their infrastructure. And you, he looked up at her, you have to live with the understanding that the man you left in the snow is the reason any of it survives. Victoria set down her tea. She had not cried. He had not expected her to. Victoria Hartwell did not cry in front of people. It was one of the most consistent things about her. But something in her face had changed during that speech. Something that had been held at a specific angle for a very long time had shifted, quietly, in a way that couldn't be undone. I knew your father didn't like me, she said finally. He loved you, Eliot said. That was in the letter too. He said you were impressive. He said he understood why I loved you. A pause. He just also said that some people are in love with the climbing, and that the climbing always ends, and that what's left after it ends is what matters. She looked at the index card on the wall again. He was right, she said, quietly, like something extracted under pressure. He was always right, Eliot said. He just never said it loud. The Dorothea Hartwell Foundation broke ground on a Tuesday, because all the things that mattered in Eliot Hartwell's life had happened on Tuesdays. The game shows, the kitchen table conversations, the box arriving, the call to Weston, the board meeting prep. Tuesday was his father's day of deliberate work, his mother's day of patient waiting, his own day of quiet accumulation. The community center in Garland, job training, after-school programs, financial literacy workshops, a small library, was built on a lot 3 blocks from the gas station where he had spent that night in the blizzard. Eliot had chosen the location specifically, not for symbolism, he told Reginald, who had been named community liaison for the foundation and who had taken the role with a warmth and effectiveness that surprised everyone but that. Then why that lot? Reginald had asked. Because Burl drove us home from near there, Eliot said. Seems right that something good stands near the place something good happened. Reginald had looked at him. Man, Reginald said. What? Your daddy really did a number on you. Yeah, Eliot said. He really did. The morning of the groundbreaking was clear and cool. One of those March days in North Texas when the light is good and the air hasn't yet made its decision about the season. I sat in the front row in a yellow dress and her good earrings, her walker parked beside her chair, watching her son stand at a podium that had his father's name engraved on a small plaque on his face. Burl Mackey was 3 chairs to her left, in a clean flannel shirt, looking deeply uncomfortable with the concept of being somewhere people might point at him. Reginald was in the second row, already talking to 3 people simultaneously. Aldous, the quiet colleague from the property firm, stood near the back. He was not a crowd's person, but he had come. Philomena Greer stood near the side, reading something on her phone with half her attention, and watching the proceedings with the other half. And Weston Okafor, who had spent 2 years receiving calls at odd hours, reviewing documents in the middle of the night, and doing work that he would one day describe to a room of younger attorneys as the most important of his career, stood near the podium in a good suit, watching his client approach the microphone. Eliot looked out at the crowd. He thought about what his mother had said. Don't do it for me. Don't do it for yourself. Do it for the people she's going to step on next if nobody stops her. He thought about Burl saying that's your mama like it was the most obvious thing in the world. He thought about his father. 30 years, unremarkable land, a used Buick, nobody watching, building the answer to a problem his son didn't yet know he was going to have. He spoke without notes. He talked about Cornelius. He talked about patience as a form of love, the long, unglamorous kind that doesn't post about itself, that doesn't need an audience, that just works. He talked about the gas station, and the blizzard in Burl's truck, and what it means when a stranger stops because it's right. And then he said, my father left me a letter. He wrote it 21 years ago, when I was young, and he had already started building what would eventually save me. And the last line of that letter was this. He paused. He wrote, whatever you build it clean enough that you can stand next to it forever. He looked at the building behind him. modest, solid. The name Dorothea Hartwell Community Center cut into limestone above the door. "I can stand next to this forever," he said. In the front row, Dot pressed her hand to her mouth. She was not crying. She was smiling. The smile of a woman who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally been able to set it down. 3 seats to her left, Burl Mackey cleared his throat approximately 4 times in 45 seconds and found several urgent things to look at on the cuff of his flannel shirt. That evening, after the crowd had gone and the folding chairs had been collected and the caterer's van had pulled away, Eliot sat on the front steps of the community center with his mother. They ate sandwiches. They watched the street. After a while, they reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, not the one from the box. A different one, smaller, older, the paper gone soft at the corners from years of handling. "He left 2 letters," she said. Eliot looked at her. "I kept the second one," she said. "I needed to read it enough times to understand it before I could give it to you." She held it out. "I think you're ready now." He took it. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was his father's, older, maybe shakier than the first letter, written closer to the end. "Eliot, if you've gotten this letter, then you've opened the box and you've done what needed doing. I'm proud of you, not for the money or the strategy. I know you know that. I'm proud because you waited until you were clean inside before you moved. That was always the hardest part. I know because I had to learn it myself. There's one more thing I want you to know. I didn't build what I built because I hated Victoria Hartwell. I built it because I loved you, and because I knew from the moment I met her that the test she was going to give you wasn't going to be about money or success or social standing. It was going to be about whether you could go through the worst thing a person can do to you, take everything, rewrite who you are, leave you in the cold, and come out the other side without becoming what hurt you. That was always the real inheritance. Not the land, not the money. The proof that Hartwell, when broken all the way down, builds something worth standing next to. I love you, son. I always will." Eliot read the letter once. He folded it. He sat with it in his hands for a long moment, looking at the street, the ordinary, unremarkable East Dallas Street, evening light on the pavement, a few cars passing. He knew, Eliot said. He knew the whole time. He knew, Dot said. Your father read people the way he read land. He saw what was below the surface. She took a small bite of her sandwich. He saw you below the surface, too. He knew what you were made of before you did. Eliot looked at the community center, his mother's name in stone, his father's invisible hands in every brick. "Mama," he said, "thank you for waiting until I was ready." She looked at him. Then she looked back at the street. Then she said, with a particular tone of a woman who has held a family together through 30 years of quiet and difficulty and who has earned the right to be a little satisfied, "I'm your mother, baby. Waiting for you to be ready is the job." They sat on the steps until the street lights came on. Neither of them was in a hurry to go anywhere.